Warning for our listeners, this episode has mentions of suicide.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Smart Tea Podcast, where we talk about the lives of scientists and innovators who shape the world. What's up?
How's it going, Maria?
Oh, still going. RT is still at my house. She's essentially a squatter.
Excuse me? I've
Just
been
kidding.
helping you for the last week, and this is the thanks I get. I see how it is.
Yeah, she actually is doing me a huge favor. I'm in school, which I've talked about a lot, but it's a very intense program, and so my wife just had knee surgery and can't get around, and I have a 2-year-old son.
And 2 dogs and a cat. Don't forget about them.
Yeah, because the dogs especially are kind of high maintenance. But she came and she helped. My wife has been like very limited in her mobility for about 6 weeks. So we've had family kind of come in, and then this is RT's week to help us out.
You've had a good community around you in terms of just like, having your parents come one at a time over the weeks
hmm
and then friends. And so I was like, you have a really good support system who are willing to drive all the way out into the California desert in the middle of nowhere to a military
I know.
base.
We've been super fortunate too, because like a lot of my classmates and some of my old coworkers have been like super helpful
Mm-hmm.
bringing us meals, and like, yeah, it's been a huge
Yeah.
help.
There's a
Um,
nice food train going. They've been
yeah,
bringing home cooked meals. It's like
I
amazing.
know. It's been great. So
Yeah.
RT is the last in the train, so this is going to be the 6th week post-op for Laura.
I've had the easiest week, that means, because Laura has been able to kind of hobble around on crutches and,
Yeah,
chase after Kai a little bit, your son Kai. But
yeah,
yeah, I'm glad I was able to come down here. Today I'm going back. I'm going to drive back because I miss my dog, Cairo, and, you know, I need to take him off the hands of the rest of my family. So, yeah.
yeah. But thank you for coming out. Thank you to your family for taking good care of Cairo while you were gone.
Of course. And it's always fun to hang out with you, even if it's there's something about doing stuff with your best friend. It's like even when you're going grocery shopping or doing something like the most mundane, stupid, boring thing, it's fun because you're just with your best friend.
Yeah, it is very
So
nice.
it's been nice. Yeah.
Anyway, so what's the story today?
Well, today we'll be talking about the Northern Lights, and I asked you if you had any Northern Light t-shirts, and you didn't have any of those specifically. It's a tough ask. But you do have an Icelandic t-shirt. It says something in
Yeah.
Icelandic.
Yeah, so my mom and her boyfriend, they went to Iceland like last year, 2 years ago, and they saw the Northern Lights up there, but they have like this expedition vehicle. So they like drove around and camped, and they got to see it like a couple of times, which was pretty awesome for them because I know Laura's parents went at the same time and
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately did not get to see the Northern Lights,
Oh
which was a
shoot.
bummer.
They
Yeah,
missed
that really
it.
sucked. They did. But anyway, this shirt is from Iceland, and we
Mm-hmm.
looked up the translation because I couldn't remember what it meant anymore. And I'm not even going to try to say what it says. It looks like it says Egg tala eki islensku, but it means
Nice.
I don't speak Icelandic, which is the case.
Clearly.
And that's
Clearly,
why
because
what I said was probably butchered.
yeah, because every Icelandic person right now is like cringing and covering
Oh.
their ears. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. But yeah, so that's today's story. Today's story, we're going to be talking about Kristian Birkeland, who kind of funny, like my brain was when I was writing this story. His first name, Christian, starts with a K, and then his last name is Birkeland. And so my mind just kept on wanting to call him Kirkland, like from Costco, the Costco brand.
Costco.
Yeah. Non sequitur, like has nothing to do with anything. But anyway, he is the scientist who figured out how the northern lights were being caused. And
Hmm.
the reason I was interested in this story is just because I haven't seen the Northern Lights in person, but I've always thought they're really beautiful, really pretty. And I never really understood how they worked or, like, what was causing them. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about that. And so I was like, well, maybe I should do an episode on the person who discovered, how they worked. And then his life turned out to be super fascinating as well. So I not only learned the science, but I learned about his life, which is really interesting. So if you're ready, let's get into the story.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. So Kristian Birkeland was born as Olaf Kristian Birkeland, but he later in his professional life just dropped his first name and went by Kristian. He was born on December 13th, 1867, and he came from a long line of Norwegian farmers. But shortly after his father, Reinhardt, married his mother, Ingeborg, which I did look up how to say these names, by the way, because I was like, hopefully I don't butcher it too badly. So Reinhardt married Ingeborg, and they both moved to an area called Christiania, which is Oslo today.
Okay.
His father set up a small merchant shop dealing with imports and exports, and business was good. They were able to afford a maid to help with chores, and the apartment they lived in was quite modern for the time. It had electricity and indoor plumbing and everything. So they were pretty comfortably middle class, like everything's going well. So Christian was Reinhardt and Ingeborg's second son. His brother, Tones, was 2 years older than him and was a very active, like athletic boy. Tones loved to go hiking and liked to compete in sports. But in contrast, Christian was much more quiet, physically weaker. He tried to avoid any family hiking trips, and he got sick pretty often. However, generally, he was a happy kid, very smart. He liked to stay home and read, and he was particularly interested in learning chemistry, math, and physics. And he would use that knowledge as a kid to play pranks on his schoolmates. So he would use the science behind things to like trick his friends.
Are you going to tell us examples of these pranks?
I don't have examples of his pranks,
Oh, come
unfortunately.
on.
I know. I was looking. I was like, can we have some examples? But I couldn't find any. I wish.
That would be funny.
It would be funny. I don't know how some of these historians get their information. They're like, he liked to play pranks on his schoolmates.
Using chemistry, and it's like, what do you mean?
Like what? Yeah. And I was like, I was also trying to think of what science, chemistry, physics tricks you could play. Like if you had a knowledge of basic chemistry and physics, what pranks would you play on your friends? Like what would you
I mean,
do?
you could do a baking soda vinegar kind of thing where, like, maybe if they sat on something, it would, like, open up a bladder
It would
and
explode or
then all of a
something.
sudden it would explode under you or something like that.
Yeah.
That's why I was, like, super curious. Like, what would you do at that
Yeah.
age that would
I
be,
know.
like,
I was
funny?
also trying to think of that. I was just like, I guess I'm just not creative enough with my knowledge of chemistry and physics. I don't know
My
what you would
chemistry
do.
knowledge is just bad. I barely made it through that class in high school, but got better at college. But now
Yeah.
I'm trying to
I'm just
think.
not the I'm just not the playing you're the playing pranks kind of person, but
I
I'm just
am. That's
not.
why I wanted to
Yeah.
know.
Ah. So you could just so you could maybe save that away for a future date, future
Well, no, because,
opportunities.
like, honestly, I feel like those types of things are the best way to learn too,
Mhm.
because you will never
Mhm.
forget,
You'll
right?
remember it. Yeah, you'll remember
And
it.
so I'm thinking, like, that might be fun for Kai as he gets older. And I'm trying to
Yeah.
start explaining, like, or as I start to explain, like, scientific concepts related to
Mhm.
chemistry or physics.
Yeah, it makes it fun.
It
Yeah,
does,
I
yeah.
I really wish I could have found some examples, especially since this was like the 1860s, and so I don't know what materials he had readily available to him. So, I don't know. I wish I knew. He especially developed an interest in magnets, though, which I also was like, ooh, what did he do with magnets? Which I feel like there's a lot of potential. I'm just not creative enough to come up with anything.
Depends on how strong of magnets and what
True.
else you have.
True. He actually saved up his pocket money to buy some magnets, and that was the first purchase he ever made. So he was serious about it.
What's the first purchase you ever made? if you remember?
That is a good question. I bet it was something boring like candy or food. Like, I have a huge sweet tooth, and I bet it was something like that. Because I didn't really get an allowance when I was a kid.
Neither did I. But I would
Yeah,
sometimes get money on birthdays.
I would never get money on birthdays. So
Hmm.
it's just not it is not something that's really done in my family, I guess. So I don't really remember saving up money per se for anything. And then even when I do want to make a big purchase or wanted to make a big purchase, my mom and dad would be like, "Oh, we'll get that for you." And I'm like, "Oh, thanks."
Oh,
You
okay.
know? Sure. I'm not complaining, you know? So I've been very lucky that way. What about you?
So I used to get money, and it's funny because one of my like very clear memories as a child was I
Mhm.
had one of those little metal like money boxes. Not like a piggy bank. I had like an actual money box, which is funny
Oh,
because now I always want to be treasurer. Even when I was like in elementary school, it was always my goal to be treasurer. I didn't want to be president. I don't want to be vice president. I want to be treasurer.
interesting.
And I feel like I've taken on that role so many times in different
Mhm.
like contexts. All started back then because that money box was just so fun. And I had like a little key. And I would keep all of my belongings in there. But then I lost my key. And that's how I learned you can't lose the key to the box because you can't open it if you don't have the key.
Yes.
But I would save my money because I very early on understood that the amount of money that I had was not like a lot of money. And I didn't
Yes.
want to waste my money on something stupid. So
Yeah.
I think my first purchase was a cassette tape. I'm aging myself. Oh, no, no, it was a CD. Oh, thank goodness. It was a CD.
Oh, CD.
Okay,
Okay.
sorry. Whew,
Yeah.
thank goodness. So it was a CD, and this is very embarrassing, but it was the Aqua CD Aquarium. You know, the song
Uh-huh.
with Barbie Girl on it?
Yes. Yes. That was your first
That
purchase?
was my first purchase that I can remember. I remember I was so excited and I bought the CD and I brought it home. I listened to it on repeat. I know all the songs on that album still because that was one of the first albums I listened to on, and I was
That's
just
so
so proud that
funny.
I was able to buy it myself.
I do not peg you as a aqua girl at all.
Well, I mean, that is kind of like electronic-ish if you listen to it. It's
Kind
like
of.
poppy electronic. I mean, if you listen to it, it's a little bit of a precursor to that. But
Yeah.
Aqua, 10 out of 10 that. And
Interesting.
then I also really like Spice Girls because everyone
Yeah.
liked Spice Girls at that time. But
Yes.
I would sit in my
Yes.
room and play Crash Bandicoot on PlayStation and listen to the Aqua Aquarium album on repeat.
That's
That was like
amazing.
second or third grade, or third or fourth grade.
Amazing. I
Yeah.
was probably reading a book, so from the library, which I did not buy. So, you know,
Yeah.
that's how my family rolled. It's like, can you get it for free?
Anyway, back to your story. Sorry, that was a.
So, back to the story. So, both Tones and Christiane attended a private high school where they had the opportunity to take science and modern language classes. Modern meaning not Latin, but French and German. Christian really enjoyed his science and math courses, and his math teacher, Professor
Bolt.
Elling Bolt Holst.
Boltholst.
Bolt is his middle name, and Holst is his last name.
I see. I see.
Yes. So that's his math teacher, and he found him to be an especially exceptional student. Christian did so well in his classes that he actually ended up graduating from high school a full year ahead of his older brother, Tonas, and with the highest possible academic marks in science and math. I feel like that would create some sort of complex with the older brother. It's like you're 2 years older, but you graduate a year later than your younger brother.
But maybe he was good at other things.
Probably. I mean, he, like we said, he's very athletic, very sporty.
Athletic. Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe he placed more importance on that kind of thing. So, while Christian was in high school, at the age of 18, he published his first 3 papers on geometry under the guidance of Professor Holst. He also handwrote an 18-page paper with all sorts of mathematical equations that apparently were so impressive that when Professor Holst saw it, he asked Christian to be his teaching assistant. And then later on in his life, Christian wrote, quote, "No other man has ever touched me as deeply as Elling when I was young, and I'm thankful to have known him. He was such a special person," end quote. But Christian didn't start as a teaching assistant to Elling Holst right away. After graduating high school, Kristian decided to enroll in the Royal Frederick University to pursue a higher education. And this was not very common back then because a high school degree back then was basically like a bachelor's today. So going to any university was like going to grad school. So not a path that most people took, especially I think in the late 1800s. He spent about a year studying chemistry, which he was also really, really good at. And then he went back to studying math under Elling Holst and was employed as his assistant to help pay his way through the rest of the university.
Wait, what year was this again?
This was, let's see, I'm not sure what year. So he was born in 1867 and he's 18 right now. So
Okay,
do the math.
so Maxwell's equations were already out.
Yes, and we're gonna be talking about that like right now. Well, very
Oh,
soon.
what a great
Very
segue.
soon. Great segue. So he was employed as his assistant to help pay his way through the rest of university. Kristian also did really well in physics, but he was a bit disappointed on how little his professor, Oscar Emil Schiotz, talked about electromagnetism because, like you said, this is a very new field at the time, and Kristian was super interested in it. Still, he ended up deciding to get his degree in physics, and he graduated at the top of his class, even though he was the youngest student. And by the way, his brother Tones graduated from university 1 year later, like a normal person, with a degree in medicine.
Oh, so he actually was also smart.
He was, yeah. He just did it on a normal timeline.
Yeah, like the
Yeah,
rest of us plebeians.
exactly. Well, I don't know if we can put you in that bucket, but yes, you graduated from undergrad 1 year early. So,
I did.
yeah. So you're a little bit more like Kristian, I think. So for the next couple of years, Kristian went back to teach at his old high school, but he also continued to work as a research assistant to Elling Holst and Oscar Schiotz doing experiments on radio waves. Soon he was offered a scholarship to go study abroad, so he left Norway and he basically spent the next 2.5 years hopping all around Europe, studying at different universities and collaborating with a bunch of really amazing people. So he first went to Paris to study under the famous French mathematician Henri Poincaré, maybe? French people?
Sure. Sounds
Yeah,
sounds good. I
great.
have a French
Okay.
neighbor. Could ask him how to actually pronounce that.
Yeah, maybe I should have done that.
Oh yeah, he's like
Poincaré.
literally right across or
He's
right next
yeah,
door.
he's literally right next door. I could have popped over and been like, "Hey, can you just speak into the microphone? Can you just say this? Thanks." So then Christian then moved to Geneva, Switzerland, where he worked with Edouard Sarrazin and Lucien Delarive on geophysics and problems surrounding electrical discharge. And he co authored two more papers here with Sarrazin. Next, he went to Bonn, Germany, where he met Philippe E. Leonard. And longtime listeners of the podcast may remember Leonard from episode 21 on Wilhelm Röntgen. Wilhelm discovered X rays using Leonard's cathode ray setup. Although, right now in the timeline, that hasn't quite happened yet, but it's the same Philip E. Leonard that we're talking about. So, we're going to get there, though. We're going to get to all of this physics stuff. Okay, so continuing on Christian's journey, he then went to Leipzig. And here I read a kind of funny little anecdote. So, in Leipzig, he reunited with one of his university colleagues, Sophus Lie. And for a while, everything was good. Like these two friends, they're reunited. They're having a good time in Germany until they start talking about the differences between German and Norwegian academic institutions and educational infrastructure. And Sophus basically said that Germany was okay, but their education system wasn't as good as Norway's. To which Christian said, it's not that bad. And then Sophus got really mad, saying that all the traveling that Christian had been doing had made him too international and that he was no longer patriotic. He was like no longer a true Norwegian. So they had a really big argument over this, and they actually ended their friendship for a while because of this.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like you're not patriotic
Also, I'm
enough. I
just
can't be friends
realizing
with you.
I should have just worn my Norway t-shirt. Dang it.
I told you Norway.
I wasn't listening.
That's
I
okay.
thought you were just saying like Norway is north near the lights because I have a shirt that
Oh,
literally says like Norway
no,
with a Norwegian flag.
oh, I see. Yeah, no, I was specifically saying Norway because he's Norwegian.
Norway. Ah, man, missed
Yeah,
opportunity. One day,
that's okay. I'm sure there'll be
maybe she'll
another Norwegian
change.
at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, so they broke off their friendship for a while because apparently Christian is no longer patriotic enough. But then, while Christian is still in Leipzig, he goes to a play called Little Eolf. And in the third act, there's a scene where the actor is supposed to be waving a Norwegian flag, but he was actually mistakenly waving a Swedish flag. Christian got so mad that he stood up in the theater yelling, quote, "This production is a scandal, using a Swedish flag when it should be Norwegian."
They don't even look that much alike, do they? Hold on, let me look it up. I'm pretty sure it's. I only know because I watch soccer. So yeah,
Ah,
it's
I
blue and
see.
yellow. It has like a yellowish crossy thing,
Yeah,
and
the
then the
Norwegian flag
Norwegian
is red
flag
with,
with a
yeah.
blue and then a little bit of white in there. That's
Yeah,
like
the
very
Norwegian,
different. That's
it is very different. Yeah, the Norwegian flag is red with a blue cross and a white border around the blue cross. Yeah,
yeah,
very different.
versus a with blue with a yellow cross. It's like
Yeah.
completely different.
Yeah. So I don't know if this actor like didn't know the difference or they only had a Swedish
A Swedish
flag or
flag.
I don't know what it was about, but Christian got really mad about it. He started yelling in the theater. And so then the audience got mad at him and Christian was thrown out of the theater. But the following
Whoops.
night, yeah. But the following night they had fixed the flag and Sophus Lie had heard about the incident and was like, "Oh, you are a true patriot. We can be friends again." So they patched things up. So I just thought that was a little funny insight into his character. In 1890, Christian is now 23. So he goes back to Norway and he starts working at the University of Christiania,
Oslo.
University of Oslo. Yes. Oslo's much easier to say.
Yeah.
Christiania.
Future Oslo.
Yes. So he starts working at the University of Christiania on electromagnetism, which is the study of electrically charged particles and how they interact with electric and or magnetic fields. So he's particularly inspired by the work of James Maxwell, who predicted the existence of electromagnetic waves because he proposed that light basically exists in the same medium as electric and magnetic fields, which led him to predicting that things like radio waves must exist. And then Heinrich Hertz experimentally proved Maxwell's theories right. So Christian was keeping really close tabs on both of these guys' research and publications. And he was performing experiments to confirm and, in some cases, even go beyond what Hertz's lab was doing. So initially, he was doing experiments where he would test the properties of electromagnetic waves in different mediums. And then, based on these experiments, he published several papers between 1890 and 1895, which greatly furthered scientists' understanding of electromagnetic fields. So he's all over this. Okay, so now in 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen comes out with his discovery of X rays based on Leonard's cathode rays. And this inspired Christian to start looking at electromagnetic waves in space. So, as I said, I talked about this a little bit with Arpita in the Röntgen episode. And actually, I talked about cathode rays in the Percy Spencer episode too, the guy who invented microwave ovens. Like, this is all happening around the same time. But for people who maybe don't remember or haven't listened to those episodes, all of this research is based around scientists trying to understand the properties of cathode rays. So, a cathode ray is a vacuum sealed glass tube that has a negatively charged electrode on one end called cathode and a positively charged electrode on the other end called an anode. The scientists would then send electric energy through the tube, and this would cause electrons, which are negatively charged particles, to get excited and fall off the cathode. And then, because they're negatively charged, they would get attracted to the positive anode. And so, this stream of electrons going through the glass tube is what they're calling a cathode ray. But they didn't know that they were electrons. They didn't know what was happening. They are just like sending electricity through this tube, seeing this glowing like stream of light, and they're like, what is this made of? Why is it glowing? What is happening? So that's what these scientists are all trying to figure out. And Kristian in particular was wondering, how would cathode rays behave in different magnetic fields? Because remember, he's obsessed with magnets. So in 1895, Kristian conducted one of his most famous experiments called the Torella experiments. And just an important point to keep in mind, a lot of these experiments that he's doing were paid for out of his own pocket because Norway at the time was a very poor country, and the university couldn't afford to give him all the high-tech equipment that he needed for these experiments. And also, kind of because of this, his lab did not abide by any safety standards at all. In fact, the university's inspection committee even refused to enter his lab because they were scared. Electric things and charges and magnetism happening in this lab all the time. Just let's pretend we didn't see it.
It's kind of funny. This kind of connects in general as we're looking at people who are doing experiments in like the early days and how much you could get away with back then.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially because he's dealing with like high electricity, high magnetism, like experiments. You would want those things, I feel like, to be super controlled, but apparently
But they
not.
don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like the whole concept of x-rays too. Like they didn't know about
Right.
radiation.
Yeah, they had
How
no
are you gonna
idea. They were
know?
just like, cool, I can see my
Cool.
bones. Let's keep doing
Let's just
that.
keep radiating myself.
Yeah,
Nothing bad
exactly.
can come of this.
Yeah. And it's like, how else are you going to study it? How else are you going to learn? Anyway, back to his famous Torella experiments. So basically, what Christian did was he took a large sphere made of lodestone, which is a naturally magnetized piece of mineral called magnetite. And this sphere is called a Torella, which translates to a small Earth because it mimics the Earth's magnetic field. So essentially, what Christian does is he places the Torella in the middle of a large cathode ray. So the whole setup is in a vacuum sealed chamber, which simulates space. And then a negatively charged cathode is in one corner, and it's giving off that stream of electrons, which would travel through the chamber and interact with the magnetic field around the Torella. And so, what Christian has basically done now on a really small scale is create how the sun's solar wind interacts with the Earth's magnetic field. So, in reality, the sun is so hot that charged particles like electrons have so much energy that they escape the gravitational pull of the sun and they shoot towards Earth. This steady stream of charged particles coming off the sun is what is called solar wind. So these particles shoot towards Earth, but most of them are deflected by our Earth's magnetic field. So you can kind of think of like the magnetic field as Earth's sunscreen, if you will, blocking harmful radiation from the sun. But at the poles, the magnetic field is much weaker. And here's where the interesting stuff happens. So in his Torella experiments, Christian saw rings of light around the two poles of the Torella. And by the way, this experiment has been recreated at the Norwegian Museum of Science and Technology and Medicine in Oslo, Norway. And they have a video on YouTube that is super cool. I highly recommend people go watch it. I'm going to link it on the website because you need to watch it.
Is
I'm
it
going
the
to put it in
one
the
minute one or the 2 minute one? Is that Norse Technisk
Norse
Museum?
Techniques Museum. Yeah, that one.
Please hold.
It's 2 minutes.
Okay, got it. Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool looking?
That's really cool. I like that. That's a really cool video.
Right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it awesome looking? Yeah.
That'd be really cool album artwork.
right? I think anything related to like northern lights or glowy things would be really cool album artwork.
Or just art. I'd put that on my
Mm-hmm.
wall.
Yeah, why not? People do. People have. That's why
Yeah.
it's like the human's fascination with the northern lights has, gone on for centuries. So yeah, so this is what Christian is basically seeing in his lab. He's seeing these kind of rings of light around the two poles of his Torella. And he's like, you know what those glowy rings look like? A lot like the Aurora Borealis, because, people didn't know what that was either. And he's like, this thing is supposed to represent the Earth. There's glowy rings around it. Where do we know about glowy lights in nature? Aurora Borealis. So he's like, I wonder if this is how that's caused. And he didn't know it at the time, but he was pretty much exactly right. That's what's happening. The charged particles from the sun are able to interact with gases in our atmosphere like oxygen and nitrogen. And when this happens, the gases become excited and emit photons of light, and that's how we get an aurora borealis. And that's also why when we have a solar flare, like when there's like intense electromagnetic radiation from the sun or more localized activity and emissions from the sun, we see the northern lights more clearly and over a wide area, and sometimes in places that you wouldn't normally see them. So when Christian proposed this as an idea, it was met with a lot of skepticism by scientists because, again, scientists weren't even sure what cathode rays were. And so now to draw a parallel between a cathode ray and saying like that's how the sun worked, that was already a tough sell. And in fact, we're not even sure how Christian himself came to this conclusion. But despite this, Christian continued to experiment with his Torella, and the more he experimented, the more convinced he became that this is how the northern lights work.
But he didn't know it was an electron thing, though, right? Because they didn't even know that
No,
the
yeah.
electron. Okay.
He,
He just
well,
knew
he
that
kind
there
of
was something related to electricity and magnets.
He kind of
That
was
was.
assuming that it's like some charged particle. So some electrically charged particle is interacting with the magnetic field to do this. That's kind of
Okay.
where he was at. Yeah.
Which
But
it had to be because you insert a
right.
magnet, so there must be a charge.
Right. And yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So in 19, sorry, I keep saying 19. It's 18s. It's the 1800s. So in 1897, Christian started leading expeditions to the northernmost part of Norway called Finnmark in the Arctic Circle to study the real northern lights. He was particularly interested in trying to get a reading on how high up in the atmosphere they were and getting magnetic field data at the poles. However, his first expedition, they were only able to observe one aurora before he and his team encountered a snowstorm that was so bad that they couldn't see or do anything. They just kind of had to hunker down until the snowstorm died down, and many of the team members ended up with frostbite. One of his students actually had to have some of his fingers amputated.
Did they have photography yet?
They did, but it wasn't great. So there are a few photographs of Christian's lab setup and his Torella experiments, but they're very like black and white and grainy. A lot of the pictures of things that I've seen in my research about the story are drawings that either Christian or his students made.
Okay. Because I know,
Yeah.
at least now, you can see the northern lights sometimes only on camera and not with the naked eye.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, from an experimentation standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
they could have, in theory, used cameras if they had them. I just don't know exactly how that works because cameras can
Yeah.
see different light phenomena that our eyes can't. And so, even if you weren't seeing it, there may have been the northern lights may have actually been present, and so it might have been
Yeah.
easier to actually also get a gradient of what was happening from an electromagnetic standpoint. That'd kind of be interesting. I'm sure they've done that kind of stuff now, but
Yes. I don't
someone
think they
must
had
have
the
discovered that.
technology. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think they had the technology back then, and even if they did, like this is the first time anyone's really doing kind of like Arctic expeditions to go observe the northern
Hmm.
lights. Like, they don't know what to observe the northern lights with. So
Hmm.
this first expedition is obviously really badly planned. Like they
People
didn't
losing
they didn't
fingers. Yeah,
yeah,
not
people
great.
losing fingers. They did not have a shelter really. They were just like, oh crap, a snowstorm, Christian didn't give up though. In 1899, he started planning a second expedition. And this time he wanted to build two observatories on top of two different mountains in Finnmark so that he could triangulate the position of the aurora. This was super expensive though, and like I said, Norway was a poor country at this time, so Christian had to try and raise the money himself because the university couldn't fund this and banks weren't able to give him a loan that big. So he figured maybe if he created some sort of useful device or tool, he could get investors interested and raise the money that way. So he developed what initially was supposed to be a switch for hydroelectric plants that would turn on and off water currents at Norway's fjords using electromagnetism, like an electromagnetic switch.
Hmm.
But although it was a good plan in theory, it was built very badly. So when Christian tried to give a practical demonstration, the device ended up blowing up. So that
Whoops.
didn't, yeah. So that didn't work. But the theory was good. So Christian kept working at it and he found a way to repurpose the basic electromagnetic technology behind the switch to make it into a cannon that would shoot missiles. And this generated enough interest from several investors who were interested in weapons and warfare and that kind of thing that Christian was able to pull together enough money to build his observatories. This is going to become important later, so keep a pin in that. So he's got the money to build his observatories, and these are the first observatories dedicated to studying the northern lights. But tragedy struck again on March 16th, 1900, when a huge avalanche hit one of the observatories. Two people died, including one of Christian's young research assistants, Elisar Boye, and a local sea captain who just apparently liked to visit the observatory every now and then. So he wasn't like part of the team. He was just like, hey, cool, an observatory. And then he died in the avalanche. Two others were buried in the snow but managed to dig themselves out. Christian was devastated by the deaths and wrote a long, heartfelt letter to Elisar's parents explaining to them exactly what he had been working on and how he died. So I think Christian did kind of finally learn from this that, he can't just take random people to the observatory and he had to be a little bit more careful with his planning. But based on the data the team had collected at these observatories, Christian was able to write a book with his findings called The Auroral Expeditions. It was met with mixed reviews because although most agreed that the science was very good, it was tainted by the death of Elisar, who had only been 22 and was such a promising young scholar. Also, there were some countries, Britain in particular, who still didn't believe in the theory of charged particles from the sun causing the auroras. So the science idea is also kind of a tough sell, despite his scientific rigor. Hi everyone, Arthi here. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If so, and you wish someone would tell your science story, I founded a science communications company called SciComm, that's SYKOM, that can help. SciComm blends creativity with scientific accuracy to create all types of science communications content, including explainer videos, slide presentations, science writing, and more. We work with academic researchers, tech companies, nonprofits, or really any scientist to help simplify your science. Check us out at SciCommer.com. That's SYKOMMER.com. Okay, back to the story. But Christian didn't stop going on Arctic expeditions and even expanded his operation, setting up more observatories, even ones outside of Norway. So he's taking this international now. And I thought this was particularly kind of crazy because not only had someone like literally just died on his watch, but also Kristian had recently gotten married. So in 1901, Kristian was attending a dinner party at one of his friend's house, Professor Henrik Mohn, who was the first director of the Norwegian Meteorological Institute. And Professor Mohn had also invited some family members of his to the dinner, including his niece, Ida Charlotte Hammer. She was smart, a devout Christian, and most importantly, was like, "Oh, Kristian, yeah, we met before. You're the guy with the magnets." And so now, like, apparently they've met before, but Kristian didn't really pay her any attention before this. But now she was like, "Oh, I remember you. You have magnets." And he's like, "Yes." And so she caught his interest.
You remember that I have magnets.
Yes, I'm the magnet guy. Yeah. So 4 years later, they got married, but their marriage was unfortunately not a happy one. Kristian was so wrapped up in his work that he didn't have any time for her. He's going on all these like Arctic expeditions and just leaving her alone at home. They never even had any kids. And after 4 years of marriage in 1909, they formally separated. And 2 years later, they were divorced. But at least Kristian had the sense to recognize that he was the one who had failed as a husband, and he made sure that he provided for Ida financially after the divorce.
I'm assuming he did not get married again.
No, he did not. He understood that married life was not for him. So Kristian is constantly working with teams going up to the Arctic Circle, which by now he had learned he needed to hire people who had Arctic living experience and who were able to survive the harsh cold winters up there. And to finance these expeditions, he's still working on refining that electromagnetic cannon that he had until one day he was giving a demonstration of his cannon and he writes this account of what happened. He said, quote, "I went through the physical principle on which the cannon was based, then said, 'Ladies and gentlemen, you may calmly be seated. When I pull the switch, you will neither see nor hear anything except the projectile hitting the target.' With this, I pulled the switch. There was a large flash of light and a deafening hissing noise. The bright arc of light was due to a 10,000 ampere short circuit. Flames shot out of the cannon's
10,000?
mouth." Yes. Flames shot out of the cannon's mouth. Some of the ladies in the audience shrieked. Panic followed for a moment. It was the most dramatic moment of my life. With this shot, my stock fell from 300 to 0 in value. However, the projectile did hit the bullseye. End quote.
Oh my goodness. Did he not test it ahead of time? Like, why does this keep happening?
He did.
Like, is he not?
No, he did. Apparently, he tested it the day before and it worked fine. But when he gave it, like when he did it for the actual demonstration, it short circuited for some reason.
He just has really bad luck with
I
demos.
guess so. But while most people would have probably been like, well, I'm done for, no one's ever going to invest in me or my ideas ever again after this fiasco, Kristian had kind of actually enjoyed the commotion that he had caused. And more importantly, he had noticed something. That bright arc of light that he had seen was due to electrically charged particles whizzing back and forth at such high speeds that they caused the air to heat up high enough to create lightning or a form of plasma. So why is this important? Because around the turn of the century, the world was facing a scarcity of potassium nitrate, also known as saltpeter, which is a naturally occurring nitrogen-rich fertilizer. So there are some scientists who are saying maybe we can make fertilizer instead by using nitrogen from the air. But that was easier said than done because the nitrogen in the air is in the form of two nitrogen atoms that are triple bonded to each other. And that is a tough bond to break. But Kristian's plasma arc was so hot that he realized it was actually able to break that triple bond in nitrogen gas and form nitrous oxide, which you could then use to make fertilizer. So Kristian got together with an industrialist named Sam Eide, and in 1905, they started a company called Norsk Hydro because they built their factory near a waterfall that Sam Eide owned. so they could use the hydroelectric power to create enough energy to generate lightning to create nitrous oxide. The device itself was called the Birkeland plasma torch, but the process as a whole of like splitting nitrogen, creating nitrogen oxide, and then creating fertilizer was called the Birkeland-Ide process. So Sam and Kristian worked well together for a few years, with Kristian using his share of the profits to finance more research expeditions into the Arctic. However, by 1910, their relationship began to strain. By this time, Kristian had sold off most of his shares of the company at under market value, and he had made considerably less money than Sam had, which he was actually okay with. He just wanted enough money to finance his research expeditions, which he had gotten. But afterwards, Sam withheld bonuses that Kristian had been promised in written agreements, and he started unilaterally selling their joint patents without Kristian's approval. But worst of all, according to Kristian, Sam started acting like he was also a researcher and started taking scientific credit for a lot of the work that Kristian had done. And in fact, this ended up having some really serious repercussions because Kristian's plasma torch and the way it revolutionized the fertilizer industry was such a huge achievement that Kristian was nominated for the Nobel Prize 7 times between 1907 and 1913. But Sam Ide wanted in on the prize too, because the process itself was called the Birkeland-Ide process. But when the Nobel Prize Committee reviewed Sam Ide's work and his contributions to the process, they realized that Sam didn't actually know much about chemistry or physics at all because he's a businessman, he's an industrialist. He doesn't know the science. So they were like, how can we give a guy who actually knows very little science one of the world's highest scientific honors? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But Sam refused to let Kristian take sole credit, even though Kristian really did deserve it. Kristian was the scientist in this team. And so Kristian never won the Nobel Prize because Sam kept butting in.
Wow.
Right?
I was going to say a word I don't want to say on this podcast, but that's not very nice.
That's awful. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
it's really selfish and so terrible.
Sometimes people are not very good
Douchebags?
people. I was going to say
Yes.
that actually.
You were going to say douchebags?
Yeah.
You can say douchebags. It's
I was
okay.
going to say that's kind of a douchey thing to do, but
It
like,
is.
yeah, it's not a very kind or, I mean, the thing is too, it would be different if he had done any of the work, but
Right?
I don't know. I guess some people are just like that where it's it's not about what you did, it's about what you get out of it. And
Yeah.
so people will do anything to manipulate a process or a situation to get what they want.
Yeah.
And it's not a good thing. It's not a good look.
And I feel like often when you do stuff like that, it ends up hurting you because I feel like wouldn't it have been better if you let Kristian get his Nobel Prize and then you could kind of be like, hey, I work with this Nobel Prize winning scientist. You should come to our company because we have him on our team. Just saying, like, you're the businessman, you're the industrialist. You could like use that as a marketing tool to get more business and make your business grow.
Or even saying like he did all the science, but like in a lot of ways he was the one who made it a reality.
Yeah,
Like
he made
even
it
though he didn't
practical.
do the yeah. So
Yeah.
they were able to apply it because of him. So you still get the glory even though you don't have the prize, which you shouldn't have because you didn't discover the process.
Yeah, the prize is for science. So you need to butt out.
Oh my gosh. It's like a lobster pot.
A lobster pot.
You've heard that before? Have you ever heard that? Or maybe is it a crab pot? A crab pot.
What does that mean?
So you can put crabs in a pot of boiling water, and
Mm-hmm.
even though technically they could create a chain and get out,
Mm-hmm.
they won't because as one crab is trying to kind of make its way up, the other
Mm-hmm.
crabs will pull it back down.
Really?
So, yeah, there's kind of a metaphor there that people use often, which is,
Uh-huh.
we are living in this crab pot where you can't let anyone else rise because that means that you aren't rising at that exact moment. But if you would
Ah.
just work together as a team, then you could all
Yes.
escape and you could all have your moment. But oftentimes that's not the reality and people don't want to do that. People end up acting like those crabs. in the pot
Yeah.
and just pull other people down because they can't
And then you're
tolerate
all
the
cooked.
idea. Yep, and then you're all
Yeah.
cooked and you all die, and that's the end.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that one. That's a really good metaphor for exactly what's happening here. So, understandably, all of this friction between him and Sam caused Kristian a lot of stress and anxiety. In 1905, Kristian suffers a nervous breakdown.
Wait, what year is this?
1905. So, we've gone back a little bit.
1905.
There's a little bit of
Okay.
back and forth here. Um, on the advice of his brother, Tones, who remember became a medical doctor, he started taking Veronal, which is a barbital, to help him sleep. But his mental and physical health continued to spiral over the next several years, and Kristian developed a dependency on the drug.
I was gonna say it's a drug.
Yeah, people didn't really know much, I think, about Veronal and barbitals and barbiturates at the time. They were just like, hey, cool, this thing helps you sleep and it calms you down. Great. And they didn't realize like the addictive properties it could have yet. So Kristian was also still fighting the tide in trying to get recognition for his work on auroras because scientists still didn't really believe him as a whole. Like there were so many theories out there about what could cause the northern lights, and there was no consensus. So his idea was just one of many at this point. He was upset that he wasn't getting recognition in Europe, so Kristian travels to Egypt to study another auroral event called the zodiacal light, which is a faint triangular glowing patch of sunlight that is scattered by interplanetary dust. I had never heard of this. I didn't know this was a thing, and I also didn't know that you could see this like in Egypt.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Did you look up any videos?
I saw a picture of it. It's literally like a triangle of light beaming down from the sky. It kind of looks like a spaceship beam, like when they
Oh,
abduct,
interesting.
you
Well, I
know?
mean, because obviously all of these phenomena are actually aliens.
Yes, clearly, obviously. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that's what it kind of looks like, doesn't it? It kind of looks like a
Beam me up,
spaceship
Scotty.
beam. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So he goes to Egypt to study this with his team. However, shortly after, World War I broke out, and most of his colleagues are called back to Europe to serve the war in some capacity or another. And they all leave Kristian alone in Africa.
Norway, it's not as big of a player, like
Right.
as if you are in Britain.
Yeah, but for some reason, I think the war made them either want to return home or they were called back to maybe create some materials for the war or something if they were selling stuff to the allies. I don't know why, but basically they all left him in Africa.
I mean, it's better than in the Arctic.
Yeah, true, true. But because he's alone and, has no one to talk to, this caused his health to spiral even more. And in a last ditch attempt to pull himself out of his depression, he traveled to Tokyo, Japan, to try and reconnect with an old colleague of his. But on June 15th, 1917, Kristian was found dead in his hotel room due to an overdose of Veronal.
Not surprising.
Yeah, he had taken over 20 times the amount prescribed, although people are unsure if this was intentional or whether his mental state was just so bad that it was an accident. He was only 49 years old.
Aren't those used like at some point in history, like fairly recent history, within the last, I say recent, but like within the last like 50-ish years? Weren't barbiturates and like that type of drug or class of drug fairly commonly used for suicide?
I would assume so. I think so. I think that's why there's probably such a push now on safety for those kinds of things, like for sleeping aids and things. You have to be really, really
Hmm.
careful. There's a lot of studies to make sure that they're not addictive and things like that, which clearly was not the case around Kishian's time. I think this
Yeah,
was kind of a new field at that time, and they hadn't
and has
properly
other
studied all
effects.
the side effects. Yeah,
I
they
mean,
hadn't.
look at us. That's kind of how it is with opioids, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
kind of how it is with drugs. And then we now have drug companies that are for profit. And so
Yes,
it it all gets so murky.
it
We
really
won't get into
does.
that, but it
Yeah.
gets murky.
Maybe that's a future episode. But yes, yes, definitely.
That's sad.
Yeah, he was so young. He was like only 49 years old, and his last few years were so difficult. So I felt really bad for him.
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly look up about his suicide. I was kind of curious.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Well, they're not sure if it was a suicide. Some people said it was a suicide. Some people said it might have been an accident, so they don't know.
This one says that on his bedside table there was a package of Veronal and a revolver.
I did see that. So I
That's
couldn't
interesting.
substantiate those. Like, that wasn't,
That may or may not be real.
yeah, that may or may not be real. That wasn't mentioned in like every source that I read. And so I was like, I wasn't sure if that was a true thing or someone had made it up for the tabloids of the time or something. Like,
Which could
who
easily
knows?
happen.
Yes. So I just wasn't sure about it, but it definitely
Okay.
might have been.
Did you say Japan?
Yeah, he's in Japan. He's in Tokyo, Japan. He's trying to reconnect with an old colleague, apparently, and
Okay.
he dies in Japan. He was cremated in Japan, and after the war, his ashes are sent back to Norway to be buried. On his gravestone, they wrote, quote, "He bound nitrogen from the air with electromagnetic arcs. He studied the northern lights, solar radiation, and the Earth's magnetic field." So it took nearly another 50 years before humans in 1967 were able to build the technology to send a space probe up and take measurements that proved Christian's theories on auroral events correct. The University of Oslo dubbed him the King of the Northern Lights, and from 2003 to 2017, his face was on the 200 kroner note. And yeah, he did not get the recognition that he deserved during his lifetime, which is really sad. I thought it all happened posthumously, and I just kind of felt like his story had a unsatisfying and sad ending, but that was his story.
That's sad.
I know. I'm sorry to end it on such a downer. I was just like, the northern lights are so pretty. I wonder how they work. And then I started reading about him and I was just like, wait a minute. Okay, electromagnetic radiation, that's fine, whatever. And then I was like, wait, nitrogen, fertilizer, what is he doing in that? And then that led him to be nominated for the Nobel Prize like a ton of times, but why didn't he win? Oh, because there's this douchebag who's preventing it. Like, and then he died. That's so sad. So yeah, but hopefully the next episode I'll find someone who is a little bit more well recognized in their time and reaps the benefits of their work and just has a happier story.
But you
Mhm.
kind of think about the kind of person he probably was.
Mhm.
He probably was like very isolated because he isolated himself.
Mhm.
And then he got into a bad situation with all that fertilizer stuff. And
I think the thing is like he just really threw himself into his work. He got married but didn't pay his wife any attention. He didn't, like you said, he didn't really have any support system around him even though he could have. And then when his work didn't pay off the way that he wanted it to, because like scientists didn't really believe him, or like there was no consensus that like, yes, he's right until 60 years after his death or 50 years after his death. So he's not getting the recognition during his time. And then even when people do recognize him for the fertilizer thing, like he's not actually winning the Nobel Prize because of, external factors. So it's like, what do you have, like the thing that you've worked so hard for is not paying off, and that must have been incredibly frustrating.
yeah, and then you also look at just like the mental health piece. Like he
Mm-hmm.
started having mental health issues fairly early on. I mean,
Yeah.
not really, like kind of. He was
Yeah,
what,
like in
30s?
his, yeah, 30s, I think. Yeah, like 35
Yeah.
or so. Yeah,
And
that's our
so
age, like around our age.
that's early on for us, RT. But
Yeah, it is.
uh but yeah, you have to think about those inputs into like what was actually going on behind the curtain. But
Mm-hmm.
I would be curious to know personality wise what some of these scientists were like. Because you look at a lot of artists and
Yeah.
people who were brilliant, And I just feel like some of those people were probably not the easiest to get along with. I think that's the kindest way to say it.
No, I think he was a nice person overall, like especially like when his student died, he was deeply empathetic to the parents. He wrote them a letter
That's
and
fair.
yeah, so I and usually when I do read about scientists who are tough to get along with, I try to incorporate that into the story that I'm telling to kind of paint a picture, but he's just seemed pretty just kind of low key overall, just really intense about his work, but like he was fine to get along with. But you're right, he probably because of his introverted nature and because he was quiet, maybe people were like, "Oh, well, we don't know how to connect with you if all you're going to talk
And
about
he
is your
probably
work."
didn't care about connecting.
Right. Yeah. Might have been a tough situation for him that I think that way, but I think a lot of the things I read about his personality were more like he was bad with money, because he was like trying to
Obviously.
yeah, he was trying to finance all these expeditions to the Arctic and then he would like say, "Oh, this is only going to cost like 12,000 kroner," and then it ended up costing three times that. And people would ask him for receipts and he'd be like, "Why? I remember how much it is." And it's like, "But we need an actual receipt in order to process this." And he's like, "I can tell you exactly how much it was." They're like, "That's great. That doesn't help us." So
Yeah.
things like that. But
And I think it's one of those things too where like what I was saying earlier, it's not necessarily that they were a jerk. It's more just
mm-hmm.
like there are certain types of people
Mm-hmm.
where they're just so brilliant or they're just so out there. It's just very hard to connect.
Yeah.
Partially because they
Yeah.
don't want to connect, but and
Yes.
maybe want is not the right word, but
Yeah.
there are things that are more important.
Yeah. They're more
Like they
interested in what they're studying and not like the local gossip or like the most interesting, pop culture news of the time, which most people are interested in, but they don't know anything about.
and so like they are isolating and then as the mental health stuff gets worse, it's more of a tendency towards further isolating yourself, which
Yeah.
becomes really easy if you already don't have a lot of people around you. So
Yeah.
that's super bummer that he didn't have the support system to kind of pull him out, but
Yeah. I did find it kind of interesting that he's like, his last ditch attempt was like going to Japan to meet with a colleague. I'm like, really? There's no one in Norway? Like, what about your brother? What about,
that's what I was wondering too.
yeah. Yeah. I'm like, you decide to go to Japan? Okay. Interesting. So, yeah. Do you want to go see the Northern Lights at some point with me?
Oh yeah.
We can like, you know, go up to one of the observatories maybe.
No, see, we got to look at that. We got to look at the chart to find like the places you can see it where the weather isn't horrendous
Mhm.
during like a solar flare. And
Yeah.
then we should plan a trip somewhere really nice. Not that the Arctic isn't nice, but if we
Yeah.
could see it in a location that's not freezing cold, I don't like the cold.
I
But I
don't
would do it just
either.
to see the northern lights,
Yeah. I don't like the
but
cold
you can
either,
never even
but
guarantee that you're going to see it. That's the
that's
hard
the
part.
tough thing. That's the hard thing. Yeah. That's tough that if you make the trip all the way up there and then you don't see it, it's very disappointing.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
why I should look at the map and be like, okay, it's possible it will be in this area. We could get
Mhm.
lucky, but maybe we can also have like a nice vacation in a place that's not freezing cold.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed. I'm down for this trip.
Thanks for listening. If you have a suggestion for a story we should cover or thoughts you want to share about an episode, reach out to us at smarttpodcast.com. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky at smarttpodcast, and listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And leave a rating or comment. It helps us grow. New episodes are released every other Wednesday. See you next time.